2020s, that's 20 years ago, a model of preventing pelvic floor disorders was introduced in Finland. This model works in the same way as Finnish dental care. School-aged children began to be given guidance and counseling at school on pelvic floor well-being. This included guidance on exercise, diet, fluid intake, hygiene, optimal urination and defecation postures and techniques, identifying pelvic floor muscles, and listening to the body's messages, such as going to the toilet when there's an urge and not holding poop in unnecessarily. These topics were discussed in daycare, primary school, and high school, and they were often combined with health education and sex education. Because the parents of these children had not received similar lessons, they were invited to kindergartens and schools for parental evenings, in which it was discussed why it is important to take care of the pelvic floor from an early age. School children and parents understood that pelvic floor well-being is important for all genders. As people began to receive guidance already in childhood, caring for the pelvic floor became a daily routine, just like brushing the teeth. It was no longer the case that pelvic health issues were discussed for the first time at the stage when there were problems or during pregnancy. This prevented a lot of problems. Another significant change 20 years ago was that access to pelvic floor physiotherapy was made easier. A visit to a knowledgeable physiotherapist was a normal part of health checks during pregnancy, and postpartum visits were granted automatically to all mothers, 5 to 10 visits depending on need. A third significant change was that physiotherapy services for children and adolescents who have pelvic floor disorders was developed. As pediatric pelvic floor physiotherapy began to receive more attention, it was possible to offer physiotherapy more effectively to children and adolescents who have symptoms and already address the symptoms in early childhood. Physiotherapy became an essential part of the treatment and prevention of bladder and bowel disorders in children and adolescents in Finland.
Well, it went like this, that in 2021 there was a huge positive change in attitudes and politics that will continue to support health promotion activities to achieve and implement preventative work throughout the nation and thereby save on healthcare costs. It was no longer unclear to anyone what the common goal was and how to get there. The key to this was research-based education as well as legislation that ensured that women who gave birth received the services they needed. Naturally, this also required directing funds in education and dedication from the Association of Pelvic Floor Physiotherapists, and this small and closed group became an open group that freely shared their know-how. In each central hospital, they had to have expertise, and the different departments had their own incontinence professionals. Primary care was also required to hire and train pelvic floor physiotherapists or maternity physiotherapists, so that all clients were on an equal footing regionally. Based on research data, the steps of care guidance and care pathways were designed together. Cooperation between different professional groups became more seamless with joint trainings that took place on a regular basis. Certain contents were repeated time and time again so that the Finnish proverb, "Repetition is the mother of studies," became a reality and an enabler of development and at the same time a bringer of a certain kind of security. For some reason, when this was done, all human envy and competition died, and all that was left was a group of professionals who supported each other and who eagerly advanced the cause of other incontinence clients as well, in addition to mothers. P.S. I actually know diddly squat about politics and finances and financial decisions, and I have more enthusiasm than knowledge. But I think this is something that will lead to change.
So 20 years ago, so that was in the 2020s, mothers used to receive almost no guidance whatsoever on pelvic floor health. But you, my future self, living in the 2060s, should really be lucky that you live in the era where continence care is sustainable and where people's vaginas and other private parts are actually taken care of. And they are taken care of with tax-funded services in the public health system. So let me tell you a story of how we actually got here. So first of all, based on research and evidence, people at the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare and the Ministry of Health and Social Care understood that the direction that this country was going was all truly effed up. Literally so. The well-being of feminist bodies was literally ignored. The bodies were depleted, leaking down the thighs. Calculations on euros spent in healthcare and incontinence were made in the ministry. Studies on the prevention of urinary incontinence and fecal incontinence were considered in these calculations, and mothers, both future, pregnant and grandmothers, were involved in the development of the new pathways of continence care, cure, prevention and treatment. And you should believe me, the grandmothers especially had so much to say, and the stories that they told. Oh gosh. Well, anyway, based on this, developments took place gradually. So nowadays, now we're living in the 2060s, young girls receive information about the importance of the pelvic floor already at the school health education classes. The youth and contraception clinics in turn deal not only with the prevention of pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, but they also deal with pelvic pain issues. They also deal with difficulties in urination and defecation, and they also deal with problems in sexual pleasure. In maternal health, the expectant mother's pelvic floor is properly tested at the very first consultation. It is tested either by a doctor, a public health nurse, or a midwife, using internal digital examination. If there is no pelvic floor activity found in this very first examination, the expectant mother is referred to an individual physiotherapist and for a sort of personalized physiotherapy. All expectant mothers will be given access to group physiotherapy, and they receive a tax-funded service voucher to a private physiotherapist for this purpose. At the postpartum examination then, the mother's pelvic floor is again tested by a doctor, a public health nurse, or a midwife with the finger test, as well as all the technologies that may be required. So, in this postpartum examination, which is taken by a doctor, a public health nurse, or a midwife, and I must add that doctors, public health nurses, and midwives are all trained for pelvic floor issues these days. If pelvic floor function is weak or it's not found in the postpartum examination, the mother is then referred to a pelvic floor physiotherapist immediately. All mothers, regardless of who they are, they receive a service voucher or a referral for pelvic floor physiotherapy, which should be taken 2 to 3 months after the delivery. And you know what? These days, physiotherapy after pregnancy and childbirth is free of charge, as is physiotherapy during the time that you expect the baby. Well, then, for all people and not only mothers, in primary and occupational healthcare as well, physiotherapists' guidance on incontinence prevention and early intervention is these days given free of charge. You can book an online chat or a video call appointment, or you can book an in-person appointment for your problems or concerns. Yes, this is a true story. The world these days, in the 2060s, is now miles ahead of what it used to be. It was really all for the sake of feminized bodies, all for the sake of leaking bodies, or however it is appropriate to call these bodies these days.